Hi, folks. This is volume 9 of our series of content videos I'm doing for you as a part of COM 215. Starting now, we're going to start talking about some of the nuts and bolts about interpersonal and small group communications. Some of these things you know already. I just want to make sure we're all on the same wavelength about that. Ask yourself this question. Is there a secret to communication? No matter what the communication is, family communication, marital communication, work communication, any form of more formalized communication, is there a secret to it? I think there is. What do you think it would be for yourselves? Is there a secret to all forms of communication? Whether it's one-on-one, electronic, in terms of these Zoom sessions, in person, one to a group, all forms of communications have the similar type of dynamics. Yeah, the specialties change and the content changes, and there may be. I believe that all effective communication begins and maybe ends with a willingness of both parties or all parties to communicate, to work on a relationship, to commit themselves to a relationship. If one or both or all parties are unwilling to do that, communication is not only going to be failing, it will be deteriorating it all. Communication begins and ends with a willingness of all parties to communicate, to invest in the relationship. After that is established, then, and here's what I think the secret is, effective communication proceeds to the ability to listen. Did you guess that one? Most of you didn't. I believe that that ability to listen is the most direct way of showing you care and understand and even empathize with the person with whom you are communicating. Listening is complex. George Carlin was a famous comedian, and he had a famous phrase. He said, "You gotta wanna." You have to want to listen. There's no big skills associated with listening. It is mostly revolving around an attitude. When I'm on campus at Western Nevada College, I love looking in at our big lecture halls that is doing a 101 course on chemistry or history. And I love just peeking in as I walk by to these packed lecture halls and looking at the students. Most of them are like this or this. They're hoping that some information will somehow go through the ether and land on their shoulders. It doesn't work that way. Communication begins with that willingness to communicate and this willingness to listen. And listening is hard work. Have you ever had a long, intense conversation with your child or close friend where they were pouring out their hearts to you and you were listening intensely to what they were saying? And after that conversation, you were exhausted, rightly so. Let me tell you a story. The first formalized organizational communication research I did was over about a period of 4 months in different types of professions and industries. My goal was to find out, were there some key commonalities of immediate supervisors, line supervisors, that differentiated the good ones from the bad ones? At the time, I had access to big gold mines in Nevada, these wonderful, noble people who would roll up their sleeves every day and get dirty looking at mining gold in huge volumes. I also, at the time, was a trainer and retreat facilitator for credit unions, not only in the state of Nevada, but around North America as well. I would work with individual credit unions and also talk to credit union state leagues. Also at that time, I was doing some consulting work and training work for Hewlett-Packard. So whether it was high tech or financial services or the industry of mining, I asked the same questions. And I asked the same questions not to the bosses, not to the line supervisors, but to the hourly employees. I asked them about your immediate supervisor, the person you report to and see every day, no matter what the title is, foreman, lead man, shifter, lead supervisor. Is there some qualities that you respect the most from your immediate supervisor and respect the least from your immediate supervisor? And no matter the profession, whether it was at Hewlett Packard or with credit unions or gold mining, the same thing started coming through. The more people I surveyed, hourly employees, about their immediate supervisor, the same thing came through. And it was sometimes created in different words or phrases, and it was the same theme. And that was the most respected supervisory characteristic that the employees respected the most was the ability to listen, to take out the time and listen, to take the time and spend time with their people listening. And here's what interesting, something I found is that the most respected supervisors listened about 2/3 of the time and talked only 1/3 of the time. Interestingly enough, those percentages were exactly reversed for those supervisors who had the least reputation, the lowest reputation. Those poor supervisors talked 2/3 of the time and only listened 1/3 of the time. And a lot of the employees said that 1/3 of the time my boss was not talking, she or he weren't even listening at all. They were catching their breath or doing some report writing or thinking about the next thing they were going to say. Did you ever have an aunt or a grandmother that used this old common folks saying, which was, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. So that should be the percentage of the time you spend listening versus talking. Well, at least that initial research might confirm that old folks tale, that listen twice as much as you talk. Now, listening is tough work. Listening involves an attitude and a commitment. It also implies overcoming some blocks to listening. Most of us are not aware that there are different types of people or issues or conversations where we put up different kinds of blocks to listening, and we're not aware of that. Back in the 1980s, I was a member of a very elite professional organization called the National Speakers Association. These are where all the professional speakers who made their living giving speeches would meet 3 times a year. And it was a very restrictive, elite organization. And we would meet, and that's the scariest conversations you'd ever see, is at a whole hotel full of speakers, all talking at the same time. A lot of egos were involved. One of those in 1984, I sat down with my Las Vegas colleague who lived in Las Vegas at the time, a gifted speaker by the name of Judy Morio. And we also sat down with an old crusty sales trainer from Scottsdale, Arizona, a guy by the name of Tom Norman. And over a period of that whole long week, we would sit down and map out some things. And this notion of listening came up, and the notion of listening blocks came up. We were the 3 who created the listening test. Now, since we created that, that whole test has been chopped up and bastardized and used in different types of settings. I'm going to share with you right now the listening test. So pull out a piece of paper, because here's your first online quiz. I'm going to ask you 8 questions. Each question will be fairly easy to answer, I believe, but your answers also highlight different types of listening blocks. Here are the ground rules. I will ask you a question. I will not repeat the question, and I'll give you about 6-7 seconds to write down your answer. Then we will go down to the next one. Okay, here we go. Question number 1. How many animals of each species did Moses bring onto the ark? Okay. Question number 2. Using all of the following letters I give you, and you may want to write down these letters, please spell out 2 words. The letters are O, O, W, R, S, D, T, W. Spell out 2 words using O, O, W, R, S, D, T, W. Okay. Question number 3. Some months have 31 days. Some months have 30 days. How many months have 28 days? Question 4. A rooster is perched upon a steeply pitched barn roof facing north. In a windy, southwesterly windy day, it lays an egg. The question is, which direction down the roof does the egg roll? Question number 5. You with me? Okay. Under commonly recognized international law, when an airplane crashes on the exact border between 2 countries, which country, either the country from which the plane is coming from or the country to which the plane is going, which country is responsible for burying the unidentified survivors? Question number 6. Some of you who have lived in Oregon or spent any time in Oregon may have an advantage here. Is it legal in the state of Oregon for a man to marry his widow's wife? Write down your answer. Question number 7. If you had a single match and entered a cold, darkened room carrying a candle, a lantern, and a heater, which would you light first? And finally, question number 8. I'm going to tell you a story with a lot of facts and figures on it. And based on the information, I will ask you a question. You ready? You may want to write some notes down to help you along the way. Okay. Pretend you're a bus driver. You get on the bus. The bus goes in an easterly direction for 4 miles and makes 9 stops during those 4 miles, picking up and dropping off passengers. It doesn't matter how many. At that time, it takes a right-hand turn and goes south for 2 miles and makes 6 stops in that 2-mile stretch, picking up and letting off passengers. Takes another right-hand turn and goes 6 miles to the west and makes only 4 stops, picking up and dropping off passengers. Makes one final right-hand turn and goes 5 miles to the north and makes 9 stops, picking up and dropping off passengers. Okay? Based on the information I have given you in here, I want you to answer the question with a number and a number only. That is, based on the information I've given you, how old is the bus driver? Okay. Let's see how you did, because you found out there's a hook to each one of these questions, because each one of these questions highlights a listening block, a listening challenge. Firstly, how many animals of each species did Moses bring onto the ark? 0. Moses didn't bring them onto the ark. Noah did. Yes. Yes. Too often, we start listening to where a person's going, and then we start tuning out, assuming we know where he or she is going. Proper, effective, empathic listening begins with that willingness to listen and be in the moment with the person and listen to everything they say. Okay. Question number 2. Please spell out 2 words. 2 words. OOWRSDTW. Most of you figured that one out. A lot of times, the answer or hints to the answer are hidden within what a person says and how that person says it. Have you ever had a conversation with a friend that they were so involved and enmeshed in something that they could not see the forest from the trees? And for you, of course, that was obvious to you. They were too much involved with it. Sometimes the answer, or at least directions or hints to the answer of it, lays in how it is said. Okay. Question number 3. How many months have 28 days? All of them. Sometimes we are way too intelligent or scrupulous for our own nature. Part of good listening is being in the present with the person, listening intently, but also the ability to step back and say, yeah, some months have 31 days, some months have 30 days. How many have 28 days? Well, of course, they all do. Okay. We listen with our eyes and with our ears. And sometimes what the words that are coming into our ears are transmitted into impulses, into images. And sometimes that can throw you off, as I did with question 4. A rooster is facing north on a steeply pitched roof. It lays an egg. Which direction down the roof does the egg roll? Roosters don't lay eggs. City people will never answer that one correctly. I was purposely trying to disrupt you by giving all of those hopefully vivid images. Part of that listening is almost intuitive as well. That ability to back up and say, okay, let me process this out based on what they've listened. That extends to the next one. Which country is responsible for burying the unidentified survivors? If we had an electroencephalograph hooked up to all of you right now as you process that question, something would have gone haywire with your brains. And you would first, with your gut, intuited that something didn't fit. And it would take your rational analytical portions of your and connections of your brain a while to catch up to. Wait a minute, there's a contradiction there. Unidentified survivors? No, you don't bury survivors unless with a fight. So part of that is listening to your gut, because your gut is usually right. So spend time being in touch with yourself. That's part of being in the moment, listening for inconsistencies. Question number 6, is it legal in the state of Oregon for a man to marry his widow's wife? If his wife's a widow, he's dead. Did you ever take those personality tests before that had all of these types of questions? Who's your mother's nephew's brother's relationship to you? Who's your grandmother's second sibling relationship to you? When I would take those tests, my mind would blank out and I say, golly, I'm not good at processing that. My brain doesn't fit with that. And I drew a wall, a barrier, or a roadblock about those kinds of questions. We all have different types of content or situations or even people that we have built these barriers or roadblocks about them over years and years. Part of you listening better is being aware of the blocks you're putting up against different types of situations or content area or even people. So listening implies you being honest with yourself. Okay. Next one. Which would you light first? Of course, you would light first the match. Particularly men who know that they don't want to read instructions, that they can figure anything out on their own. They're going way ahead on answering this. Well, I'd have to light the candle first or the lantern first so I can see the heater and light that. No. Go back to the question, which would you light first? And part of good listening, especially for responding or developing some kind of action steps, is to listen to the sequence which is necessary and questioning that. That's part of good listening too. Questioning your assumptions, questioning what's being presented to you as well. Finally, how old is the bus driver? What was the first thing I said at the beginning of that story? Pretend you're a bus driver, you get on the bus starts going in a, whatever it is that I gave you the answer in the first sentence. Pretend you're the bus driver. So how old's the bus driver? It is your age because you're the bus driver. That's part of our challenges we have in everyday situations is we are bombarded with so much information throughout our day. Part of good analytical listening resides in dismissing those things that don't apply to the current situation and asking yourself what's relevant to the situation right now. So good listening is also being scrupulous about what you're listening to. Now, my guess is if you've answered 4 out of the 8, half of these, you're doing well. The ones you've missed, not only look at the ones you've missed, but review the listening block that question meant to identify. You can become a better listener, knowing that it's mostly attitude, wanting to listen, and being aware of your own specific listening blocks, whether a person you don't know or more specifically, a person you do know in your small groups. I believe listening is an active process. Counselors call that active listening, as opposed to the passive listening the students were doing in the lecture halls. Active listening takes a lot of work, and you're listening with your ears, with your eyes, with your heart, and with your gut as well. Listening is tough work, but from there, you gain understanding, and you share with that person just by the quality of your active listening that you do care about them. Listening is the most direct, immediate form of showing that you care and actively listening. From the active listening, you start learning how to become more empathic with a person, with a group, with the situations. So now you see why I believe if there is a secret to communication, interpersonal communication, it's the ability to listen. If we don't listen, we'll never understand a person and their situations, and relationships will flatten out. Listen about that, give it some thought, and I'll talk to you next time.